Hey English 345 students, welcome to week 10. Can you believe we're like about 2/3 of the way through our semester already? Within a few weeks we're going to be turning in final research projects and time is just moving so quickly. So let's go ahead and just see exactly where we are in this process. So if we look at our course calendar, we're going to scroll all the way down to week 10 and look back at week 9 just a little bit too. Okay, so in week 9 you learned all about the linguistic subfield of semantics, and you touched even a little bit on psycholinguistics in connection with semantics. That was in assignments 5.1 through 5.3. And this week we're going to be moving into pragmatics, looking at the other 3 assignments that are in Module 5, and along with those you've got your research project annotated bibliography. Hopefully you've been able to get some work done on that bibliography during spring break and the time since spring break, so it doesn't feel like lots of things are going on this week. But just be aware that all 4 of those assignments are due. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into our module folders. And we'll go down to Module 5. All right. So last week, as I mentioned at the beginning of our video, you got your introduction to semantics in assignment 1.5. You thought a little bit about what it means to know a word, maybe from the perspective of a writer, a future teacher, or whatever you might be using English for in your life going forward after this class and after college. You got to know a little bit about the elements of word meaning, like extensions and denotations and connotations. So you got to know all of these different kinds of ways of thinking about word meanings, which is really important for teaching languages, for being a good writer. It's going to help you in lots of areas of your lives. And then you finished up with assignment 5.3, the psycholinguistics of word meanings, how these different meanings we attach to words and the different categories we place all these words in, how we organize that in our minds. And I think that'll become relevant again later in the semester when we go and start to look at first language acquisition, second language acquisition, and all that's going to come back to us. We're going to be looking a little bit more about how the brain operates. So that gives us a little sneak peek into that later on in the semester. Okay, so everything you need to submit your bibliography this week is right here in the Module 5 folder. You've got the guidelines, and I went over those in a previous video a couple of weeks ago. So if you need to go ahead and look that up again, I believe it's probably week 8. That I went through that, perhaps even week 9, but it was not too far in the recent past. Okay, when you're ready to upload your bibliography, you'll just do it here at this Turnitin link. And like I was saying before with the bibliography, this is going to give you a lot of good potential resources that you can include in your final research project. A lot of times students will ask, even in other English classes, like English 102 for example, okay, once I've written my bibliography, I'm done with my research, right? Like I can't add anything else, or I can't, drop off a source and maybe replace it with a different one. And the answer to all of that is no, that's not the case. This is flexible. So once you've got your 6 sources that are required for the annotated bibliography, and let me just double check that I've got the right number of sources there. I might be thinking of a different class. So just to make sure I'm not telling you the wrong thing, let's go ahead and open that and take a look at the number of our sources that we need. Okay, so moving down here a little bit. Okay, yes, you have 6 sources in your bibliography. I know it's a different number in another class that I teach, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't telling you the wrong thing. So in your final paper, you're going to have 5 sources, a minimum of 5 sources, 3 scholarly, 2 of which can be class readings or other supplementary sources. And your bibliography, you're going to have 6 sources, which gives you the chance to leave one aside if you don't want to use it. But going back over here, this is kind of still a flexible research process. So we're in week 10. If you've got 6 sources that you like at this point, that's great. If you're still unsure about some of them, that's also fine. You might decide to drop 2 of them off later on in the weeks that are coming and replace them with 2 other sources that you like better. You can add other sources to your list. So this is still a flexible research process. Research is trial and error. It's a process, and it takes time to get from the beginning all the way to the end. So even as you are ready to submit your final research project and maybe you came across another source that you wanted to include in your paper at the last minute, it's still fine to do that. So you can always add or subtract sources as necessary and appropriate as we get to the end of the semester. And if you're having any doubts, any questions about sources as you collect them, don't hesitate to get my opinion or, drop by a virtual office hour, send me an email. I'm more than happy to give advice about that. All right, this week we are moving from semantics into pragmatics. And I think one of the things you'll like as we move into this subfield is that all the previous ones that we studied, like phonetics and morphology, syntax, semantics, they felt kind of technical in some ways. You had to study specific symbols and diagrams, and maybe it felt almost like taking a math or a science class at different times. But now as we move into pragmatics and even into language change and the history of language, like historical linguistics next week, we're going to start to take more of a bird's eye view of language, not looking at these individual little elements, but kind of looking at it more from a macro rather than a micro level. And I think a lot of students appreciate that transition because they get to see language from a different perspective. So in assignment 5.4, you're going to be learning all about pragmatics, kind of meaning and context. It's a little bit about the social use of language, but kind of how our social context contributes to meaning, how we, let's say, take turns in a conversation, how we communicate messages to each other, sometimes in indirect ways, and even the way we use different statements or even intonation, how that can contribute meaning to what we say. I think you'll find it pretty interesting. So you'll get a crash course in that in assignment 5.4, and you'll take a quiz by clicking on that link. As you move down into assignment 5.5, here we come back to semantics a little bit, but I think you'll find that these are two pretty fun resources to work with. This is going to be a discussion activity, but you get a choice, just like we did with a previous discussion activity. So you'll choose either to watch this Ann Curzon TED Talk, What Makes a Word Real? And you'll answer the questions there and post them at the discussion board just by clicking on this link here. You can also go directly to discussions. If you scroll back up here on the left side, you can access discussions from here. Be aware that the links to the articles in the discussion area are behaving a little strangely. I'm going to see if I can try to fix them and make them link properly, but right now they're not linking properly for some reason from the discussion area. I'm not sure why. So if you need to get to those articles, you can definitely get to them here from the assignment link. This is a really great TED Talk. She's a professor of linguistics talking about how we decide what words are real and which words aren't, I guess, or how we create new words. It reminds me a lot of this TED Talk that some of you responded to earlier in the semester, the one about making up new words by the lexicographer Erin McKean. And so you'll find that there are some similarities between these two TED Talks, but basically you're going to think a little bit more about what makes a word a word. What does semantics have to do with this? Who has the authority to decide if a word is a word? Is it just dictionary writers, or is it the speakers of the language who decide if a word is actually a word? In some ways, we as a language community, because we communicate with each other and we talk to each other, we decide really what makes a word a word. So what role do dictionaries play in all that? And I think, those of you who are going to be teachers or writers someday, this is important for you to think about, because your students are going to come to you thinking that the dictionary is the ultimate authority on everything as far as meaning is concerned. Is that really true? It's a good debate to have, or a good, I think, topic to think about when it comes to language. And you'll also think about other ideas from her talk that change the way you think about words and their meanings. So this is one option. The other option is to read a pretty interesting article by Daniel Cox called "Do the Words We Use to Describe Pregnancy Reveal Our Feelings Toward It?" This is another way of thinking about meaning, the culture we live in, the society we've grown up in, the history of the word, how all of that history kind of comes forward forward to the present? Does it influence the meaning of the word at all? And so Daniel Cox is going to look at this in several different languages, look at the history of the word pregnancy, the kind of cultural attitudes that are attached to that state of being, and how that might influence our feelings toward it. So meaning is not even just created in the present, it sort of comes forward from the past and mingles with what we're doing in the present. So this is another really cool one to think about. So you can choose number 1 or number 2, post your response in the discussion board, and then once you've finished your response, you're going to go to someone who didn't do the one that you chose, and you're going to respond to them. Okay, so as it tells you here, you'll react to the one that you didn't choose. So if you chose to do a post on number 1, you're going to react to someone who did number 2. So what did you learn about word creation or word meanings that you didn't know before? So in a reply of about 50 to 100 words. And in these replies, I really want you to stick with the ideas that the other person has shared. So even though you think they did a great job, let's just assume we know everybody did a great job already. So I really want you to stick with the ideas that they're expressing and give your reaction to what they said and what you learned or didn't learn from what they posted. Okay, and finally this week you've got a journal choice activity for Pragmatics. So when you click on this link here, it's going to take you to the journal tool in Blackboard. And you have the option to choose among 3 different areas of pragmatics to focus in. And like I said here, there's so much to learn in every subfield of linguistics. It is actually really hard to choose what to focus on. And I know all of you are probably going into different areas with your English major, or if English is your minor, or maybe you're majoring in another area but English is a focus for you. So you choose the one that you think will be most interesting and most applicable to your future life. So I've chosen one article here, Pragmatics in English Language Teaching, and I think this is useful to you whether you plan to teach native English speakers in a high school or middle school setting, or if you think you might want to teach English to non-native speakers someday, or even if you think in your high school English class you might have students who are non-native speakers. So when you're teaching language, often we think that the main things to focus on are grammar and vocabulary and the rules that we have to teach about how to write or how to speak. But language is so much more than just those symbols we see on the page or the rules that we have to follow. Think back to all those prescriptive rules we talked about back in the beginning of the semester. So what does it mean to be able to communicate competently in a language? Is it just about grammar and vocabulary, or do we have to think about things like intonation, turn-taking in conversation, interrupting? How do you teach these things? What are some good strategies for that? Okay, so that first article might be good if you are interested in that one. Okay, the second one is the impact of hedging language on writing. If you're planning on teaching writing someday, or maybe being a professional writer someday, this might be a good choice for you. Okay, so we might often think of the social use of language in conversations when we think about pragmatics, but writing is another form of communication where we can explore the social uses of language. Okay, so in this article, it's going to be talking about hedging language, like the language we use to be polite, or in certain circumstances like academic writing, we might use hedging language like would and could and might and may. Okay, so when is this appropriate? When is it overdoing it? Should we teach students to write only in that way? Are there other perspectives on that? And so you can read that blog post if you're interested in that topic. Finally, language use in the age of the internet. How has the internet changed the social context of language? Okay, one example that comes from this article: has LOL evolved from an acronym meaning laugh out loud to take on a pragmatic role in online communication? Has it taken on other meanings beyond just that original acronym? So that's a pretty interesting article to explore how the internet has changed the way we communicate and what some of the norms of communication are. Okay. Once you've chosen your article, then you'll write a 2-paragraph summary and response, about 150 to 200 words per paragraph. In the first paragraph, the summary, introduce the author, the title of the article, along with the author's thesis and main ideas. And then in the response, you'll critique or evaluate their ideas. Okay, in the response, that's going to be your opinions about the article you summarized. Do you agree? Do you disagree with the author? Are there any certain strengths or weaknesses you noticed in that article? And you can include your personal experience in that as well. Okay, you don't have to follow a specific citation style for this. It can be, just 2 paragraphs on a document, and that's perfectly fine. We'll save the formal citation styles for your research project. And to do that journal entry, you just click on Create Journal Entry, and you can add your response to your chosen article there. Okay, moving back to Module 5. We're wrapping up Module 5 this week, so I thought it would be kind of interesting to take a look at this graphic down here that sort of puts together everything we've been looking at from the beginning of the semester to now, and it actually puts it into a tree diagram. You might not want to see any more tree diagrams at this point because you've worked with a lot of them, right? And you still even have an extra credit opportunity to do a few more. Don't forget about that if you haven't done it yet. But you have till the end of April, so that's perfectly fine. Okay, so as I've told you here, we've covered a number of linguistic subfields, so it's kind of interesting to see how these all fit together. And this diagram shows us how all these different areas of linguistic study fit together and where it's going to take us next. So just like in a tree diagram, you have a sentence at the top. Here we have all language at the top, this big broad area of language. Underneath language, we have structure, we have pragmatics, and we have use. Under structure is all these different areas we've been studying since the beginning of the semester. The medium of transmission. We have to speak, right? People have to understand each other. And so we study phonetics and phonology. Phonetics is all the articulatory phonetics you learned in the beginning. Phonology is kind of the rules that govern those. We didn't study that area quite as much because phonetics takes quite a lot to learn as it is. But phonology, just so you know, is the area that organizes and creates rules around phonetics. Okay, grammar is another area of structure, and we learned about how words are put together based on different types of morphemes, derivational, inflectional morphemes, syntax, all those tree diagrams. You looked at how phrase structure works, how we organize phrases into different parts of a sentence. And then finally, meaning. Semantics is what we looked at last week. So lexicon being vocabulary, discourse is speaking to each other, how we, kind of get together and take turns and communicate ideas in different ways through the way that we express our words. And then up here you see pragmatics is sort of moving beyond that structure. Like I said, taking more of a bird's eye or macro view of language and looking at the social context of language and how we, figure out how we communicate with each other in that way. And then finally, use. So, as we go into next week, we'll give you a little sneak peek at Module 6 coming up here next week. Okay, so language variation and change. So if you want to take a little look around in this folder, you're welcome to do that. These assignments won't be due until in April, but we're going to be looking at how languages evolve, language families, how different languages are related to each other around the world, language trends. I think you're going to enjoy this one about the quotative like, because we use like about 50 million times in every conversation, and you'll kind of see where that trend came from, whether it's still a trend and if it's here to stay or not. So that's what we'll begin with next week, and I think you'll enjoy these topics quite a lot. Okay, so that's everything for this week. So just to recap it all, you've got 5.4 through 5.6, your bibliography you're going to be submitting by next Sunday as well. And that's going to carry us well on our way to the next few weeks leading up to the end of the semester. So we'll be in Module 6 for the next couple of weeks. In weeks 11 and 12, you're going to be working on the draft of your final research project, which is like a shorter version of the final project you'll submit at the end of the semester. From there, we'll be moving into language acquisition, first and second language acquisition, two of my favorite areas to study. And that will be in Module 7. And from there, we're headed to the end of the semester. Final exam, final project, and even final extra credit project if you're interested in doing one of those. Okay, so that's everything for this week. Let me know if you have questions, doubts, concerns, and I'll look forward to seeing you all next week for our entry into Module 6. Bye-bye.